Ansible is crazy popular with network engineers for one good reason. It's agentless. It doesn't need an agent. What does that mean? Let's talk about that. Not requiring an agent, it's a pretty big deal for network engineers because Ansible, Puppet, and Chef, they don't only help automate network devices, they mainly help automate servers. And with Puppet and Chef, that normally involves us installing an agent on said servers so they can do their stuff, do their thing. Ansible doesn't require that, and it's great for us because we can't install agents on our routers and switches. Well, I take that back. Nexus, we can, but we'll cover that in a moment. Ansible is Python based, and normally how it would interact with servers and well, mainly servers, is it would execute its commands via Python on the box. With routers and switches, we don't have Python running natively. Well, not all of them. Instead, it's going to connect via SSH and run commands like we would, connecting to the router or switch. Except it's not going to be using, a human. It's going to be using Ansible code, which, let's face it, is more reliable. You'll mainly see Ansible running on Linux, running on Linux-based systems or even Mac. Sorry, Windows users. So you have to install. That's pretty much it. Or run it in the cloud. And you might recall from our nugget where we talked about the different data serialization languages, Ansible uses YAML, or how I like to call it, Yansible. YAML is the belle of the ball. It's the prettiest of all the data serialization languages, so we're going to have fun with it. Let me bring our router out here real quick. Way too big. As far as configuration managers go, we have two different models. We have the push and the pull. Ansible's a bit more pushy than the rest. So when thinking about network devices and how Ansible can automate, it pushes. It can also support the pull model in some situations, but for this purpose, think push. Salt and pepper. Push it. Believe it or not, that's the first song I learned how to play on the guitar. Oh, and did I mention that Ansible is open source and free? I mean, of course, there's options to pay for it, like you can invest in the Ansible Tower, which allows you to just orchestrate like a mad person. But as far as like installing it on your Linux machine right now, it's very simple and very free. All right, let's get to work. Let's start pushing some config to some routers and switches. To get Ansible working, we have to first, well, obviously install it, and then we have to set up a couple of files to get things going. So I've already installed it here. It's on my Ubuntu machine. The first thing we have to get set up is our inventory file. Our inventory contains our list of devices that we want Ansible to control, to configure, to manage, to automate. I have that situated in my hosts file. So I'll jump into that file real quick because I do need to add some hosts to it. Nano hosts. So I'm going to put my devices in this file. I've got a bunch of stuff in my lab here I'm going to throw in there. I'm going to start with my routers, and I've already got one in there. 192.168. I got a 249 in there and a 251. So notice I'm kind of grouping my routers. Actually, I'm not kind of. I am grouping my routers in this kind of variable group name called router, and there's all my routers in there. And I do have about 3 switches I'll throw in there too. Okay, so I got all my devices in there. Now I have some more stuff going on down here. Like I'm defining another variable, my devices, to group those two variables. So notice it says my devices, and then it says my devices children. Switch and router, these two groups up here are my devices children. It's a weird concept, but it's interesting. And then I'm setting some variables of how to connect to my devices. I've got I'm telling Ansible I'm going to use a local connection using this Ansible server, and I'm going to be using my username, password, network chuck, password 123. Those are the credentials for my devices. So with that file set up, my inventory file, I'm going to save that file, get out of there, and then we'll define what we're going to do to those devices, to our inventory, with something called a playbook. Our playbooks will be in that beautiful, beautiful YAML. YAML ain't markup language, and this very much borrows the term from sports, from football, both the soccer version, the European version, and the American version, I believe. Within a playbook, you'll have what are called plays. So whereas the playbook is just the whole set of instructions of what you want to send to your routers and your switches, each play is a way for you to divide it further, saying, oh, maybe I only want my routers to do this, so that's the play for the routers, and then I'll have a play for my switches. I only want my switches to do this. So you can divvy up your instructions in sections. And then going even further, like a Russian nesting doll. A Russian nesting doll. Each play will have a list of tasks to perform. Let's take a look at the one I built for this example. So this is my Ansible playbook. Blue 42. Set. All right, let's go. And notice it is in beautiful YAML. Recall that YAML values its space. It needs a space. It's white space. So how much room you're putting between all these things and how you're organizing them determines the structure. If you screw it up, it won't work. So whereas Blue 42 is my playbook, looking in here, the first little section here, name general config, is my first play. So we open our book and we say, okay, what are we doing? Okay, here's the first play. Here we go, team. Within this play, we determine who we're going to be talking to. The host is how we determine that. And because this is my general config, I want it to apply to all hosts. So things like the banner and the no IP domain lookup. By the way, this host is looking in that host file, our inventory file. And then we have our tasks. We can have multiple tasks underneath the play. Here's our first one. First task is adding the banner. Now notice, what you're seeing here isn't like CLI commands, right? But it does look kind of familiar. Like we see, okay, where we have this section, it's actually called a module, iOS banner, and then we have, what type of banner? Well, it's gonna be the login banner. You know, we got MOTD banner, login banner, it's gonna be a login banner. And then we have our text, what the banner is gonna say, and the state, we want it to be there. We could actually say state not there, not present. Now this, again, is a module. A lot of these are built into Ansible, and it's basically a file that describes how Ansible is going to perform its task, and we can interact with it, and actually we can look at the list of modules right now. I can look in the Ansible doc and then do a grep, basically a search for anything that begins with iOS, and look at that! A bunch of Ansible modules we can interact with our iOS devices. Now as we scroll down, you can see I have another task in that play. This one being disable DNS lookup. This is an iOS system module, and I'm saying lookup enabled. False. I don't have time for that. And that ends my general config, and that was one play. One play with two tasks, and I'm applying it to every one of my devices. Now as I keep going down, I've got a new play right here. This play is for my router config, and notice for host, I'm specifying just the router group, so whatever host I put in that router grouping. And in my router specific configuration, I'm going to configure OSPF. And notice with this one, I'm using the iOS config module, and I'm simply just putting in some configuration lines, network, blah, 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 area 0, right? And also what's cool is you have the parent. So basically, it's saying this config must precede this config. This is the parent, that's the child. This has to happen before that, and it will do that. It's really cool. And then I have one more task in that play. I'm configuring a static route. Next hop. 1077.11. Now this isn't like I'm just throwing random config in there just to play. But again, you could design a network just like this, push config, it's beautiful. And then going down, I've got one more play, my switch config, looking at just the switch host. And I'm creating a VLAN 1972, and throwing in gigabit, I can't talk today, gigabit Ethernet 2/0. But notice, it's not Cisco iOS, right? Like it's not something you would type in the command line, but you can kind of gather what's happening. So now let's run our play, run our playbook. Let's do this. Gonna clean things up here, and let's run that playbook. Ansible playbook, that's our command, and then we'll specify the playbook, which was blue42.yml, our YAML file. Let's run that sucker. Look at this. This is what's cool about it. It will run each task, give you a success or no success off of each task. It's beautiful. It tells you what changed, tells you what didn't change. Now a couple key things to note. As you scroll through here, we can see that, like, okay, the configure the static, and I said router, I meant route. Notice that it didn't change it on one because it was already there, but it did change it on the others. Same goes for the DNS lookup. Looks like all my routers already had it disabled, but the switches did not. So it changed that config. So it gives you the status for all the commands you enter. It's a lot better than copy and paste. Copy and paste, you get no feedback unless you scroll through and see that it just didn't go through. It's such a pain. This is so much better. Let's run it again. We can run the playbook again and see what happens. Notice the banner is not being added because it realizes the banner's already there. Same for DNS lookup. What's cool about this is at the same, I'm configuring all my devices and then a subset of my devices and then the other subset of my devices with one playbook. It's killer. And then we get a report back. Now, like many of the examples I show you, this is just scratching the surface. This is nothing. But this gives you a base example of how it works and what you could possibly do. Now, there are other elements we can implement into this. Like one of the big ones is templates. You may recall that from our first skill, when we first started talking about what is network automation, I used a Jinja template, which is a templating tool we can use with Python to generate templates with variables. You can do the same thing with Ansible. And you know, I kind of want you to go back to that nugget and watch the templating one where I was doing a nugget about configuration management. And some of the same problems I mentioned there are still, we're still addressing those here. But notice I had to write a Python script. I had to know a little bit of Python to get that going. With Ansible, you don't really have to know any programming. Like this was all just, I installed it in Linux, I looked at a few modules and I said, yeah, I want to change that and that and that. I didn't use programming. I didn't use Python. Knowing Python will always help you, but I didn't need to know it. And also contrast the the nugget before with how cool this one was. I could more easily, a lot easier, it's crazy easy, configure multiple devices, groups of devices, have error checking and tell me if it worked well or not. I have a bit of idemtification, I can never say that right. But the idea that when you're applying configuration, if there's no change that's going to happen, then it shouldn't apply. Ansible, our configuration management tool without an agent. Great for us because guess what? We can't install agents on our routers and switches, or most of them anyway. So Ansible is a perfect solution for network engineers and network management. It's why it's so popular. It's Python based. We connect to our devices with Ansible via SSH, the same as you would do it yourselves, but Ansible is using code to interact with your routers and switches. And we set up that configuration using playbooks. Blue 42, playbooks, which have plays within those playbooks. Plays are ways for us to configure subsets of devices within our network infrastructure. I can have a play for switches, a play for routers, a play for wireless access points. And then within those plays, we have tasks. We can divvy up our tasks. So for one task, I can say configure OSPF. For another task, configure all my interfaces. You can divvy up your tasks, and when you run these, you get a check saying, oh, did it go well? Is it great? Yes. Ansible is really fun. It's one thing you can actually start to use in your lab environment, test environment, and even maybe start to introduce into your company if you're currently working at one right now. A great way to start automating configuration. And in a lot of cases, it's a lot better than writing your own Python script to do what we did in the first skill, what is network automation. This is a lot easier and a lot better. If you want to know more about Ansible, we do have some great stuff here at CBT Nuggets on how to dive deeper into that. Sean Powers has some nuggets on Ansible. And of course, there's DevNet. Go to developer.cisco.com. They've got tons of examples on how to use Ansible in your network. And it's free. Install it on Linux. Get that going. It's just fun. In the next few nuggets, we'll look at the other options, Puppet and Chef. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.